Lovely to have you okay, welcome to a rather windy but sunny Hailing Island. Now the Boston 11, or give it its full title, the Adidas Adizero Boston 11. I'll do a quickie good and bad video on this one after my first run. Okay, I've had to move somewhere a bit less windy. So right, the good bad points of the Boston 11. So good point, the £140 at retail, but on the Adidas UK site you can get them at 30% off, and I think even a 35% code from Running Heroes should work. The bad point for me is that I could only get them at full price from Zalando, but the good point is that they actually do them in the UK 13.5, which is the first ever Boston that I've had that actually fits me properly, so that's a great bonus for me. Good point if you like a relatively firm shoe by modern day standards, and these are great. I think it's a very good combination here between the Lightstrike Pro at the top, giving like a nicely sort of cushioned but sort of responsive layer, and then the Lightstrike regular foam at the bottom, just sort of probably allowing the shoe to be a bit cheaper and adding to a bit of durability and also the firmness. So I think as a sort of like a training companion to the Adios Pro 3, this kind of actually works better in a way, I think, than the Zoom Fly 5 does, and maybe the Alpha Fly and the next one. Say it just seems like a more similar shoe, and you just feel like you are actually getting something here that is not meant to be something that's the top shoe, because it is sort of like a combination of the sort of cheaper foams. Bad point, depending how you view it, is the weight. And rather oddly, in these ones, my left shoe was 382 grams and the right shoe is 369. I don't think I've ever had such a big differential between left and right before. I suppose the good point is that that actually is exactly the same weight, more or less, as the Zoom Fly 5. So maybe that's the trend these days for the training companions, to be sort of a relatively hefty shoe. But I think I suppose we have to remember that these are for training. And I think with this one, I kind of was expecting it to be that sort of weight based on the Boston 10. So a good point is that despite the fact that they were rather heavy, I actually managed to get a course record. And in fact, I'm standing now actually on the end of the course record that I got. I did sub 6 pace for just under 2 minutes. So I've got a race, 10k race tomorrow, so it's a good little test. It does rather show sometimes it's not the weight of the shoes is be all and end all. They actually do feel like quite nicely responsive, these ones. I think with the fact that it's sort of relatively firm, they do have some sort of plastic rods in them apparently. I never really wanted to read out specs of shoes, because you can sort of say it's got this foam, this sort of technology, that sort of technology, but by and large they're just buzzwords. So how does it actually feel on the foot? Well, to me it just feels like a shoe that is relatively firm, but it just sort of like feels like you sort of spring off the road quite nicely when you got going. If we actually look at the shoe, a good point I would say is the lockdown is pretty good, especially for my sort of relatively narrow feet, but they've already had to put in the laces a fair bit here, so it's rather a traditional, rather generous number of eyelets for Adidas, so you always feel like you can get some manipulation of them to get a good fit, and I think there's no exception here. In fact, if anything, they've actually sort of come a bit looser during the course of the run. I did 8 miles including that segment, so I think during the course of the run they've come a bit looser, and I'm probably going to have to pull them in again. Quite nice here that at the top you've got no pressure on your big foot at all. It actually sort of sits quite sort of higher up, so I've certainly got plenty of room now. I've got the 13.5. And good point there is that sort of see-through mesh. You can see my white socks sticking through. Apologies that they're Nike socks, not Adidas ones, but there you go. Good point, I suppose, if you're rather traditionalist. You've still got a bit of suede in shoes these days. Adidas perhaps the last company that still put suede in some of their shoes. Good point if you like a gusseted tongue. Well, this has one. It's not a very thick tongue, to be said, but you've got a bit of padding there just to protect your feet across the laces there. At the back here, you've got Adidas's new sort of like mini pull tab that they're introducing onto all their Adizero shoes. There's not really much to the heel counter here. It's quite minimalist, and I think they've actually tried to save a bit of weight, like they did in the Adios 7 as well. So the good point, I suppose, is quite a generous stack in these. I have to look at the exact specs, but if you're comparing these to, say, the Adios 7, this is almost like the same shoe, but just like beefed up. So it's about 100 grams more, but you feel like the Adios 7 now is sort of like a budget racer. So a good point, I think, for me, who's enjoyed the Adios regular versions and Boston over the years, there's now sort of like quite a differentiation between the two again, and you kind of feel that both of these have their place. I mean, I think people bemoan the fact that the Boston sort of grew a lot and went into this lot heavier, sort of almost like daily trainer type style weight, but in a way I kind of see the point now, because I think there's a trend now for modern day shoes to really want people to have a lot of cushioning, and I don't think the Boston really had enough of that to sort of really justify that as a sort of daily trainer for most now. I think some people could, but if you took now the Adios 7, I think you could use that as a daily trainer if you wanted to like the old style Boston minimalist version. But for me, Adios 7 is kind of like now like a budget racer. If you saw my video of that, the actual shoes are actually pretty similar. Both of them have now got the dual density Lightstrike Pro at the top and Lightstrike at the bottom, but there's just more of it in the Boston 11. So you just feel like you've actually got more of like a daily trainer shoe. But the good point of the thing is that you feel like you can actually get going in this one. As I said, on that segment I was sub 6 pace, and on the road it felt like I was just sort of like able to bob along nicely. Yesterday I went out for a recovery run in the Invincibles, and it just felt like hard work. I just felt like I was fighting the shoe. It was just so soft that every time I put my feet down I feel like I was sinking as much as I was going forward. With these ones, they're exactly the same weight more or less, but I just felt that although it wasn't that sort of plush soft feeling, I don't think I actually really want that. I think I just want a shoe that feels nicely cushioned and feels like I'm actually helping you to move on the ground. Something like the Invincible just feels like it's just like hard work. I know some people like it, but I sort of feel like I'm going off it a bit, and I think maybe a shoe like this is something I should wear for my normal daily training, just like how I used to use the Boston for years and years and years. In fact, I started wearing the Boston about 2010 and only stopped a couple of years ago when I realized that the 12.5s that they were doing just weren't long enough. And so it's great now that I have the option to have my proper size. So obviously this is my first run in the shoe, and I think I'll have to see how things progress. But yeah, I'm quite encouraged so far, and I think if anything I prefer this to the Zoom Fly 5. Maybe as an element I just sort of knew what to expect with this one, because I got the Boston 10 last year and it was too small for me basically. I was sort of cursing it, but I still managed to do a course record when I did my first run in that one. So today's run was kind of almost trying to repeat the same thing, just to prove to myself and everybody that you can run sort of relatively fast in a heavy shoe relatively. And you know, at the end of the day it's just down to how fit you are and just getting on with it. And you know, does the shoe work for training? Well, yes. I mean, the whole point of training is to sort of save your legs for the races, and I've got a race tomorrow, so obviously won't be wearing those in the race. But yeah, I think, you know, during the course of the week when I go out for my sort of easy to steady runs, maybe even with tempos, these will definitely be an option for sure. So have you had a Boston in the past? Are you interested in this one this time? I think definitely worth a look at this one. Now that I've got my right size, I'm sort of feeling this shoe in a lot better light than I did last year, so apologies if I rather cursed it last year. It is of course rather heavy, and if you are a traditionalist and liking that really sort of minimalist old style Boston, then yeah, go for the Adios 7 now, because that's kind of more of that ilk. And then if you want to spend more money, go right to the top, go to the Adios Pro 3. But I think definitely now that I can sort of see that having the Adios 7, the Boston 11 and the Adios Pro 3, those shoes sort of fit nicely together, and I'll be keen now to do a shoe off between the three to see how they compare, because they're all in a way sort of performance shoes that also you could wear for sort of daily training. I think even the Adios Pro 3 is a shoe that you could take out on a daily basis. It's a bit expensive to do so, and I don't really recommend using carbon racers for everyday training, but it is an option. I took it out for a long run the other weekend, and it wasn't too bad. It felt like it was a shoe that wanted to go faster than it actually did. So yeah, maybe the Boston 11 will be that shoe for the long runs where you don't feel like you need to go like at race pace like you might feel like you do in a shoe like the Adios Pro 3, and there's a lot more sort of to it than the Adios 7, which is now quite a minimalist shoe by modern day standards. So yeah, I'm quite excited by this one actually, despite the weight. So just goes to show that weight isn't everything in a shoe. So what do you think of this one? Any interest in it? So I hope you found this interesting. Like and subscribe on all that, and see you next one then. Bye. Bit of railway for the railway enthusiasts. Maybe the Boston 11 then will be a good compromise for that sort of long runs. Oh, sorry. Standing in the middle of the path here where a runner came through.